Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. DeFilipi. You can call me Dr. D as well. You normally see me talking about experiential education, or you'll see some of my core ELMS messages. And if you haven't yet, please check your emails because I know they're there. But when I'm not doing experiential education, I'm teaching about herbal medicine and natural products. So, herbal medicines and functional foods. Occasionally, I am able to run the elective, but in the meantime, as a little preview, you get to have me as part of your pharmacy uh, practice lab, your PPP lab. So, let's get started, and we're going to talk about cannabis today. So, I will just share my screen. Okay, so this is an introduction to medical cannabis. And as I would say in my course, welcome to Weed Week. In the course that I teach, we spend a whole week on this, but you are getting the condensed, the too long didn't read version. So let's start off by talking about the cannabis genus. So the cannabis genus, if we remember our taxonomy, harkening back to the last time you probably took a biology course, um, you have cannabis genus within the family Cannabaceae. Now, Cannabaceae is a large family, and it also contains plants within the genus Cumulus or hops. So I like to say if you like a good IPA for a beer, you do actually like something that is a bit cannabis adjacent. Its characteristics include that it is an annual dioecious flowering herb. So dioecious meaning it has distinct male and female plants. So both male and female plants are required ordinarily in dioecious species in order for there to be offspring, in order for there to be seeds, and for the plants to propagate. So because of that, the males have staminate flowers and the females have pistillate flowers, meaning they have a stamen, the boy part of the plant, and a pistil, the girl part of the plant, on the two different sexes of the plant. However, some of these cannabis species are a bit different and they can have hermaphroditic plants or hermaphroditic properties, meaning one plant can have both boy flowers and girl flowers, and therefore they are auto-pollinating and a lot easier to propagate and to make more of. The cannabis plant and of all species pretty much grow well in multiple climates from continental to tropical, but we know they're probably native to Central and South Asia. So think of like the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, China, Vietnam, those areas. They have distinctive serrate or toothed compound leaves. I don't have to describe to you what a pot leaf looks like. And they have highly varied secondary metabolite composition. So I like to describe secondary metabolites as the things that plants produce because they cannot run away. Primary metabolites are the things that we think of when we think of contributions to general nutrition. So whether they're sugars, other carbohydrates, proteins, things that are essential for any sort of living organism to take in so they can survive and keep their metabolic processes going. Now, highly varied secondary metabolites, these secondary metabolites provide a benefit beyond basic nutrition for these plants. What does that mean? Well, actually, I have a good example if I just stop sharing real quick. So I'm filming this at home. So this is a Madagascar periwinkle plant. Ordinarily, it has these really beautiful like pink flowers, and you can Google it, Catharanthus roseus Madagascar periwinkle. But um, this plant grows in tropical climates. You'll see it in the Caribbean, Florida, areas like that. The problem is this plant, I mean, it doesn't have thorns or anything, right? So it can't protect itself. So what does it do? It produces vincristine and vinblastine, which are secondary metabolites, which are very, very highly toxic. So they're all over the plant. So even though I'm touching it, it's only if you ingest it. But all of these plants have vincristine and vinblastine, these toxic chemicals naturally produced in them. So they act as anti-fetants. So the animals know not to eat them. And many times secondary metabolites can end up being turned into drugs. So I mentioned vincristine and vinblastine. They're very toxic, and they're especially toxic to cancer cells. So they're used in chemotherapy. And that's one of the reasons why we should protect our environment, because you never know what kind of drugs might be able to be synthesized from the secondary metabolites which plants are naturally producing to survive. That's my little soapbox. 1 second. Anyway, let's get back to cannabis. So we have three main species of cannabis, cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, both of which you've probably heard of before, and then cannabis ruderalis. Now, sometimes cannabis ruderalis is included as a subspecies of cannabis sativa, but I don't necessarily agree with that classification, so we're going to talk about that later. But as you can see, kind of there's sativa, the very big one, middle one is indica, and then ruderalis is the last one on the picture on your right. So let's talk cannabis sativa. So cannabis sativa is the most naturally psychoactive cannabis species, and it's cultivated for its high concentrations of THC and lower concentrations of CBD. THC being our main psychoactive compound, which it makes sense because users will experience a mind high, as they say, when they consume cannabis sativa and things derived from its extracts. This mind high might energize and reduce anxiety at proper therapeutic dosing. Appearance, cannabis sativa is the largest of the cannabis plant species. It can grow up to 12 feet tall, long branches, narrow leaves. You can see it right there. It's also commonly cultivated to produce hemp because it grows so large. So it's quite useful in the textile industry. And likewise with textiles, it has multiple uses depending on the strain. Uh, because of its high THC content, if people want to get a recreational high, they generally go for cannabis sativa species. Uh, in terms of food, that some cultures use its oils and other things for cooking. Seed oil as well can be used as wood varnish, hemp oil in various ways. Religious or spiritual significance, that's when we talk about our good friend Bob Marley and Rastafarianism down in Jamaica. So it's very interesting because it's one of the reasons why I think the US government really doesn't federally want to step into regulating the cannabis trade all that much. They want to leave it more up to the states. Why? Because any Rastafarian, it is a sacrament in the Rastafari religion that smoking, as they call ganja, means that it's considered a sacrament. And you cannot deny someone the freedom to practice their religion under the First Amendment. Therefore, I think the federal government, among many other reasons, does not want to touch cannabis right at this time. However, we have some developments, so we're going to get into that later. And as I mentioned, it's also used as an industrial fiber with hemp. Now, cannabis ruderalis. So this is the one you probably haven't heard of. Its name is derived from the Latin word for rubble, ruderalis. Ruderalis literally means the first to colonize disturbed lands, or sometimes considered growing among waste. So physiologically, this plant is a very hardy plant. It grows wild in cold or otherwise difficult climates. So it's found often in Eastern Europe, Russia. We're talking Mongolia, Siberia. It's actually used in some traditional medicines within sort of the Russian Far East, and northern China and Mongolia, Inner Mongolia. Uh, it's the shortest of the cannabis plant species. It's very stubby. It's very weed-like. Surprise, surprise. And it grows in nutrient-poor soil. So it has also, in terms of its phytochemical or plant chemistry profile, has very low THC content and very low CBD content. So you might be asking, Dr. DeFilipi, why are we bothering to learn about this plant if we can't effectively use it to treat anything because it doesn't have anything therapeutic, or there's no THC, there's no CBD, there's nothing useful? Well, even though it's rarely grown for medicinal or recreational use, cannabis ruderalis is often crossbred with cannabis sativa or cannabis indica to create hybrids with desirable phenotypes and phytochemical profiles. What does that mean? If, let's say, I am a hemp farmer in Iowa, because they can farm hemp, hemp is made from cannabis sativa species. However, hemp needs to be selectively bred to have a very, very low THC content, or else it becomes illegal to grow. At least illegal to grow in that high of a quantity, because you're going to have whole fields of this hemp. I forget the number. I believe the number is around like can't have more than a 0.3% or 0.2% THC content per plants on average. If the FDA or the DEA goes out, and actually it would be the DEA that goes out and checks these farmers who are growing their hemp, and they find that the THC content in the hemp is too high, What do they do to the fields? They burn them because they're illegal drugs. They're C1 drugs. However, and burning, I guess, is their preferred method. What that does to folks downwind, anyone's guess. Either way, neither here nor there. If we want our farmer to have those lower THC levels within his cannabis sativa plants that he's trying to grow, what do? We crossbreed the cannabis sativa with cannabis ruderalis. And the offspring, because ruderalis's THC content is so low versus the high THC content of cannabis sativa, the offspring is going to be somewhere in the middle. And you can eventually, through trial and error, through generation after generation, create the perfect hybrid plant with the exact dosing, concentrations, and ratios that you're looking for to produce any therapeutic effect. Likewise, because Cannabis ruderalis is so good at growing in very harsh climates, if I wanted to grow cannabis sativa plants up here in Massachusetts, then I might want to crossbreed them with Cannabis ruderalis. Same likewise with Cannabis indica as well, if I wanted to grow indica plants, because it has natural secondary metabolites in there, which kind of act as an antifreeze. So the plant is hardier in colder conditions. Cannabis ruderalis is also self-pollinating and auto-flowering, which again um, aids in the reproduction of the plants. So you're more able to more easily breed and produce and seed your cannabis plants. So, as I said, increasing or decreasing CBD content as well for hybrid medical strains of cannabis is also a quite important role that ruderalis plays. We'll get into that later as we talk a little bit more about cannabidiol. Lastly, we have Cannabis indica. It's named after where the specimens were first collected, which is India and the Hindu Kush Mountains. Again, it grows quite well in a very harsh, colder, dry environment. Physiologically, you can see it looks different than cannabis sativa plants. I like to refer to it as a little chunkier, right? It has larger buds. It's a little bit more oil filled. And it generally has a higher CBD content and a lower THC content, although this could vary depending on how it's hybridized or how it's propagated. However, as a general rule, Cannabis indica has the inverse phytochemical profile to Cannabis sativa. So Cannabis indica has high CBD and low THC. Cannabis sativa has low CBD and high THC content. So because of this high CBD content within Cannabis indica, users usually experience relaxing effects. And CBD is also known to provide some pain relief, to decrease nausea, and to increase appetite. So just looking at that symptom profile, it makes sense that Cannabis indica is most often used in medicinal cannabis, whether or not it is for pain relief. A lot of times it's used in oncology for cancer or chemo-related pain. It can also be used in HIV or AIDS patients to help decrease nausea. Likewise with our oncology patients with chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, and as well as to increase appetite, which is very good in any person who is medically indicated to gain some weight if they have cachexia related to cancer, AIDS, you name it. I'm a visual learner, so I like to just show you these guys side by side. There's sativa versus indica. You see how the leaves are slightly different. Indica has those thicker buds. Sativa grows a bit skinnier and taller. Next, we have the chemistry of cannabinoids. So let's dive into. So I've been talking about CBD and THC, but what exactly are they and what do they do? So I should point out at this point in the presentation, in terms of our phytochemical chemistry, I'm not going to make you memorize structures or anything. You have biochemistry and medicinal chemistry, and you certainly had orgo for that. I just, as I said, I'm visual. I like you to appreciate the differences and the complexities of these naturally occurring, very interesting chemical structures. So these two cannabinoids are aromatic phytochemicals appearing in various concentrations of the three main species, but mainly found in sativa and indica species. As of 2024, we have over 140 cannabinoids that have been isolated from cannabis species. Of those 140, I'm sure there's even more that are yet to be discovered, but we're only going to focus on the two main ones. So the two main cannabinoids that we're going to focus on are tetrahydrocannabinol, say that 3 times fast, otherwise known as THC, which is the primary psychoactive compound of cannabis, most commonly found in highest concentrations in cannabis sativa. Cannabidiol, or CBD, is often used for a myriad of issues, notwithstanding pain relief, movement disorders, anxiety, depression, seizure disorders as well. It is found in the highest concentrations in cannabis indica. So there's our CBD and our THC. Let's start by talking a little bit about THC. So, as I mentioned, these are secondary metabolites that are naturally produced within the plant. THC specifically helps cannabis plants grow and avoid or better thrive in their environments. So it helps protect it from environmental stressors, namely maybe high temperature changes, ultraviolet light as well. So you can think of THC as a kind of sunscreen for the cannabis plants. And it also makes it the plant unappetizing to insects. So it helps the plant survive in an environment where lots of insects might want to eat it, so otherwise known as insect predation. The full chemical name is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. So you'll sometimes see it called delta-9 THC. It's all the same compound, it's all THC, and when you buy something with THC content in it, unless it specifies otherwise, you can assume it is the delta-9 version of isomer of THC. It's the most commonly psychoactive isomer, and it's known to simply as THC when used in cannabis products. As I mentioned, it's the primary psychoactive component, so it works in the mind, it crosses that blood-brain barrier, and research continues to determine its medical efficacy in treating multiple disease states. So there's ongoing research for cannabis in the treatment of multiple sclerosis, neurological and neurodegenerative disorders. Again, it's crossing into the brain, so it kind of makes sense that you would look at sort of brain disorders or neural disorders, and as well as psychiatric disorders. Now, you might not have realized, but we actually do have THC on the pharmaceutical market right now, and that is dronabinol or Marinol, which is currently a C3 drug, which is it's very interesting that cannabis in its own is a C1, meaning it's completely banned and illegal. However, THC, a synthetic version of THC itself, is marketed as a C3 drug, as Marinol. So it's a synthetic oral preparation of THC. It's mainly used, its main indications that are the treatment of chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, or CINV, that's the abbreviation for it. And it's not the first-line treatment, so that's why it's refractory to conventional anti-emetic or anti-nausea agents. So if the other anti-nausea agents aren't working, this might be the second or third thing you try with the patient. It can also be used as an appetite stimulant in the treatment of anorexia, associated with weight loss, which might also be associated with HIV or AIDS. Off-label use, it's also used for a bunch of other things. Cachexia, again, that's the weight loss, failure to thrive, and the weight loss in cancer patients. Potential use in reducing sleep apnea symptoms. There's an interesting, there's a cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, which is if people have cannabis addiction or they have substance use disorder related to cannabis products, sometimes they throw up quite a bit, hyperemesis. They get very, very nauseous, especially with overuse of recreational strains. So it's kind of ironic that you would use THC to help with hyperemesis, as well as cannabis addiction and dependence. It makes sense logically, but it is kind of ironic. And it can also be used as an adjunct analgesia for chronic pain as well. So again, off-label. So our main ones though are chemo-induced nausea and vomiting and appetite stimulation. As far as its mechanisms of action, it has complex effects on the central nervous system. So that's appetite stimulation mediated via interaction with cannabinoid receptors in the hypothalamus. And we know it definitely acts in some way on the vomiting center in the brain to block the release of neurotransmitters from the vagal afferent terminals, and that ultimately helps to reduce emesis by affecting the terminals, which otherwise, when activated, produce emesis. All right. Its dosage forms: dronabinol comes in capsules, 2.5, 5, and 10 milligrams, oral solution. Very, very important contraindication is it's an absolute contraindication. You can absolutely not give it to a patient who has this aspect in their medical history. If the patient is allergic to sesame oil, that is an absolute contraindication. They should not be taking dronabinol. Why? Because the THC is separated in solution via sesame oil. So it's used in the production process. So you don't want to expose someone who could have a potentially very allergic reaction to a sesame oil product. Likewise, its oral solution does contain a little bit of alcohol. So you want to wait you want to wait 14 days after the person stops taking metronidazole containing products or any other drug that might cause a disulfiram reaction. Disulfiram reaction is those drugs like metronidazole, the antibiotic, where you can absolutely not take alcohol with it because it reacts with the alcohol and makes the people very, very sick. Common adverse effects are kind of what you would expect for a THC product. Dizziness, drowsiness, emotional lability, so dysphoria, euphoria, sometimes paranoia even. There might be some impaired cognition and GI pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, occasionally reported. Very rarely do we get amnesia, seizures, or bradycardia. Next up, the other secondary metabolite found in cannabis is CBD, or cannabidiol. It's mainly used in the treatment of neurological disorders like epilepsies, and can also be used with psychiatric disorders, anxiety, psychosis. But I think the main products that you will see, especially in terms of balms and cosmetic dosage forms, are for analgesia or pain relief. And it comes in a wide varieties of dosage forms used in foods, beverages, cosmetics, dietary supplements, coming to a Walgreens, a CVS, and Albertsons near you. Unlike THC, CBD is not psychoactive, which is why it was sort of the first product to be accepted in these pharmacies across the nation. You're not going to get high from using CBD, at least not in that sort of sense. And CBD was also instrumental in the creation of a newer drug, Epidiolex, which is a prescription medication for childhood epilepsy. It's a CBD extract. It's not a botanical drug because there's only one active ingredient, and it was developed from the Charlotte's Web strain of cannabis. I wonder, why is it named the Charlotte's Web strain of cannabis? Well, a little girl in the slide that you're seeing, her name is Charlotte Biggie, and Charlotte, when she was about a year or so old, started having these severe seizures, and she was diagnosed with Dravet syndrome, which is a severe childhood epilepsy condition. It's genetic, it's a genetic disorder. Charlotte had, beginning from when she was about one, she began having about 300 seizures per week. Per week. Just imagine that. These poor parents were worried sick. Their little girl can't eat. She can't walk. She can't talk. She has zero quality of life. She can't go to school. She needs a feeding tube. And every day is so touch and go. And none of the prescription medications at the time were working for her. So she was on all of these different childhood pediatric doses, and even then sometimes adult doses of the common anti-seizure medications, anticonvulsant medications. Nothing was working. They were starting to be at their wits' end. They were even considering veterinary medicines. And then the father just happened to see a YouTube video. This was back in like 2015 or 2012, 2013. Saw a YouTube video from a doctor abroad who was treating Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, similar seizure disorder to Dravet syndrome, which Charlotte had. He was treating those pediatric patients with high levels of CBD. So like CBD oil, either infused through their feeding tubes or in their food, like peanut butter and stuff like that. Applesauce, you name it, just anything that is easy for a small child to swallow. And they were having great success in treating the seizures. Well, in around then, cannabis was legalized for medical and recreational use in Colorado. So the P's moved to Colorado. They went to a CBD and THC dispensary, a cannabis dispensary, and they said, "Can we have the strain with the highest amount of CBD possible that you have?" And they were like, "Sure," because no one was buying it, right? You can't get high off the CBD, so it clearly wasn't a very popular product. Uh, so they took an extract from that CBD product, very, very high CBD content with barely any THC in it. They gave it to Charlotte, and they waited. And that day, she didn't have a seizure. And then the next day, she didn't have a seizure. Charlotte went from having 300 seizures per week to having only one seizure per week. And just like that, the Figgies got their daughter back. She was able to start to go to school. She was able to catch up with her twin, who was already walking and talking, and she was able to play and live life like a little girl, like a little girl should. And through research and case studies, just like Charlotte's, eventually the FDA approved cannabidiol extract in the form of Epidiolex, that's its brand name, to treat severe childhood epilepsy like Dravet syndrome, which Charlotte suffers from, as well as Lennox-Gastaut syndrome and tuberous sclerosis complex, or TSC, which is when there are tumors that grow in the brain and affect the seizure centers. So it significantly decreases seizure frequency and significantly improves quality of life for these children. Now, the mechanism of action is still not fully understood. However, we know it broadly reduces neuronal excitability and it heightens the seizure threshold, meaning the seizure threshold in these children is generally quite low, so it's very easy to surpass and then they get a seizure. So it makes it harder for the body to overreact, for that chain reaction to start in the brain, which sets off a seizure. So basically, it calms the brain down through multiple proposed mechanisms of action. Dosing is given as an oral extract or tincture, and it can also be given via feeding tubes, which, as you might imagine, is very useful for these young pediatric patients who might not be able to chew and swallow. It's dependent on hepatic impairment as well as tolerance, so the dosing is very precise. There's even a dosing calculator, which you'll be able to view and play around with if you click the link on your slides right there. Side effects and adverse drug reactions. The main thing to watch out for is hepatotoxicity or liver toxicity. Uh, Obvious signs of that would be jaundice and vomiting because Epidiolex is mainly hepatically cleared. It has an absolute contraindication with strawberry allergy, which I thought was really interesting. I only found this out because I have a friend who's a pediatric pharmacist, and she asked if I knew about it. Strawberry flavoring is used to flavor the Epidiolex, so it comes flavored. So they have to be quite careful if there is a berry allergy or if there's a strawberry allergy, you have to special order an Epidiolex, which is unflavored. Sedation is common. That makes sense. High levels of CBD are going to sedate. However, you can titrate the dose to be as high or as low as possible with the highest therapeutic effect with the fewest amount of side effects, if at all possible. Diarrhea, decreased appetite, pyrexia is also sometimes found. And with any seizure drug, caution with sudden discontinuation. You start low and go slow, and you don't discontinue it, or else you might get rebound seizures or other symptoms. So this is just an overview of our cannabinoids, our two most well-known cannabinoids, and some of the things that they are known to affect. But we don't just have THC and CBD. We also have these other ones, these minor cannabinoids, which don't occur in as many concentrations, but they also have some very interesting properties in and of themselves. And there's this thing, especially in the cannabis industry, which is called the entourage effect. What is the idea behind that? The entourage effect is the idea that all of the cannabinoids, whether it's CBD, THC, THCV, CBN, CBG, they all work together synergistically to create an enhanced therapeutic effect. The idea being that CBD alone might not be as effective as CBD, THC, CBN, all of them, because they all are chemicals, they're all cannabinoids, and they all have their own interactions with each other, which might affect either agonizing or antagonizing, say, the metabolism of certain other cannabinoids within the body. The entourage effect is basically the idea that maybe an extract is more effective and that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So you might hear about the entourage effect a little bit. It's very interesting and it's still very much being studied. So let's talk about in the next part of the lecture, from prohibition to legalization. So cannabis has officially been illegal federally in the United States since the Controlled Substances Act, or CSA, of 1970 under our current laws. It was first made illegal in like the 1930s, but that was quite frequently challenged. It didn't really get a set in stone ranking as a Schedule I drug until the CSA was passed in 1970. And when that CSA Act was passed, it became a Schedule I drug, joining heroin and LSD, having a high potential for abuse and no recognized medical use. However, almost immediately, we had state-level decriminalization. So Oregon was the first state in 1973, and others followed. It was improved for investigational new drug research, as well as compassionate medical use in 1978, after multiple states and attorneys general and other organizations filed lawsuits. And the DEA actually began recommending reclassification of cannabis in 1988. So the government has consistently opposed that, although we have seen some movement more recently. Medically, cannabis is now legal in 48 states, DC, and 4 out of 5 territories. And Epidiolex was also approved in 2018, and of course, Marinol before that. So THC and CBD and cannabis products really have been around quite consistently, despite federal legalization, because of course, we know the Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause means that although federal law supersedes state law, the federal government can decide whether or not they want to enforce state law, which might contradict federal law. And so far, they really have not touched it. Recreationally, medical recreational marijuana. Recreational marijuana or cannabis products are still illegal federally. However, laws have been coming down with that as well. Washington and Oregon became the first states to legalize recreational cannabis in 2012, Colorado soon after. And this might be part of the reason why. Great shift in public opinion. We've had a giant shift in public opinion in support for legalizing marijuana. Beginning in 1969, there was only 12% for it, and then 68% that we see from this Gallup poll last conducted in 2021. I'm sure the numbers are probably even higher now in 2024. And this might be one of the main reasons why cannabis job creation in the US has soared, going from just 120,000 to in 2021. Again, I'm sure it's probably over 500,000 now, cannabis jobs that have stimulated communities, and folks are very excited. Depending on where you live, I know if you live in Massachusetts, you see a new dispensary, it feels like opening up every other day with a new billboard up and down I-91 as you make that commute in. I also thought this was funny too, because there's a growing need for cannabis as people get more stressed out. And you can see this. This was in January to February and March in 2020. What could have been happening back then? This was cannabis sales in the state of California, and you can see how with these sales, it spiked. People were literally stockpiling their edibles and things as soon as the stay-at-home orders for COVID happened, and people are dealing with stress. It's a stressful time in our country. It's a stressful time around the world. So this is one of the reasons, of whether it's healthy or not, that people medicate. So here's cannabis in the USA as of August 2024. This is the most edited slide that I ever have in any of my presentations, because it feels like there's a new law passed every single day. Recently, it was Minnesota, which completely legalized recreational cannabis. You'll see that anything in the blue is legal for recreational and medical use. So cannabis, you can get it from a dispensary for recreation, or you can get it with a medical card for medical use. If it's dark green, it's legal for medical use, but not for recreational use. So you'll see in states like Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, the Dakotas, Utah, it's legal for medical use, not legal. Also, New Hampshire, missing out on that recreation up there in the Northeast, surrounded by an island of blue. Dark green, only legal for medical use. Light green, so in our states like North Carolina, like Texas, Kansas, Wisconsin, Indiana, light green, it's legal for medical use with limited THC content. So the legislatures, through whatever means they have deemed it to be an acceptable THC content, set that content level, and they regulate their local medical industry under that purview. There are only 2 states where it is illegal. That's Idaho and Nebraska, although it is decriminalized in Nebraska, which is very interesting to me. So it's illegal, but you can't go to, I guess you just get a citation for it or something. You can talk to the folks in Lincoln and Omaha. I don't know the full story there, but Idaho is the only state where it is completely illegal in all forms, which is kind of funny, because you imagine those folks from MSU up in Missoula, Montana, traveling across that panhandle to visit friends in Spokane, and they're just white knuckling it the whole time. Um, anyway, so find your state, find your own jurisdiction. It's really a patchwork across the United States. And furthermore, if it wasn't complicated enough, we have a lot of tribes in the US. We have Native American reservations, Indian reservations across the continental United States. You can see them all demarcated in blue all across here, tons in the west, but many smaller ones in the east. And it's quite interesting to see how even in a state where it might be illegal, like Idaho, because these tribes are their own sovereign nations technically within those states, they can choose to either legalize medical or legalize recreational cannabis pretty much with impunity because they're not governed by the states which they exist in. It's the same concept for my folks who live in the Northeast, where gambling is illegal in Connecticut, but our two Indian reservations, our two Native American reservations, the Pequot and the Mohegan, they have Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods. So they're able to build casinos there and make money for the tribe. So it's really a wonderful economic opportunity for these tribes, even in states where THC and CBD and cannabis use are otherwise very restrictive. So just as an example, for a state where both medical and recreational cannabis are legal, I'll give you an example because it's quite close to how most states where both are legal, how they handle it. So medically, in Massachusetts state law, it is legal. You can apply for a card and join the state medical marijuana registry based on your patient, your caregiver, or your provider status. So you don't have to be the one taking the cannabis to get a recreational marijuana card in Massachusetts, or sorry, not recreational, a medicinal marijuana, medical marijuana card. Looks just like this. You might not be able to see me with the thumbnail, but you can see it looks like a photo ID. Get a registration number and an expiration date, can be renewed. It can be used for CBD supplements sold in pharmacies as well. Medically, that can be gotten without a card, of course. But if you want to go to an actual medical grade dispensary, there are many in and around, especially the Springfield area. More info can be found on the website if you click. And what's interesting with the medical marijuana card, this sometimes comes up. I know back when I was working at Walgreens, it would be very occasional, but folks would come in wanting to pick up their, like, say their C2 prescription, so like their Adderall or something. And they'll be like, oh, I don't have my driver's license, but I have my like card. And I'm like, this is not a valid photo ID. But again, very ironic, right? You can't use that card to pick up your C2 through C5 medications or your C2 medications, but you can use it to pick up your C1 medical marijuana. Interesting, right? Next, we have recreational marijuana. It's legal for anyone over the age of 21 years old to purchase from a dispensary or possess it, which is, what's interesting is its restrictions are kind of like open container laws. It's very similar to alcohol, even with like the 21 years old age limit. So you can't use marijuana in any form on public or federal land, because again, it's federally illegal. You can have up to 1 ounce on you and up to 10 ounces in your home. There is a limit of 6 plants per home and up to 12 plants for 2 or more adults. So as I tell my students, sorry, if you are all living together, you cannot have 24 marijuana plants if there are 4 of you in a house. And again, open container laws apply to marijuana just like they do to alcohol. And as I'm saying, it's even more of a patchwork. I've been struggling to find another map on this, so maybe any Massachusetts friends can let me know if their town has changed. But you can see town by town in Massachusetts, red is a permanent ban. Yellow has a moratorium on retail shops that sell recreational cannabis in Massachusetts. And green, there's no town statute that says it's illegal. So up in the western part, if you see the notch right there, that's red, that's Southwick. You can see Agawam to the right of Southwick, to the east of Southwick. It's has a moratorium, a temporary ban. But then you get to the green, and that's Springfield, surrounded by the sea of red that are the Long Meadows and other towns. But those towns are just missing out on the extra tax dollars, I guess. So this is my other slide that I have to update constantly. In fact, I had to update it yesterday, which is why I was a little late sending you this presentation. We've had some very exciting updates in federal law and potential for legalization of cannabis as a controlled substance. So one of the first things that was done was the Medical Marijuana and Cannabidiol Research Expansion Act, signed into law by President Biden. It was on 12/2/22, easy date to remember. It's the first marijuana bill to ever pass Congress, I guess not including the CSA. And the law intends to advance research on the potential risks and medical benefits of cannabis products, and their synthetic equivalents as well as increasing raw product access for both growers and researchers. It also ensures that physicians may discuss the potential risks and benefits of marijuana and CBD with their patients, which, according to some state laws, physicians were previously not allowed to do so. However, in May 16, 2024, the DOJ issued its notice of proposed rulemaking related to the transfer of cannabis from a C1 to a C3 drug, meaning it would be purchasable and prescribable with a prescription as a C3 drug. It was initially from the Health and Human Services Secretary Rachel Levine, who's over in that left-hand corner. She was the one to write the recommendation for it, and then the Department of Justice issued its notice of proposal and rulemaking. And this just in, the hearing date was just set. So the hearing with the DOJ and the DEA is set for December 2nd, 2024. There's even room for public comment. So I guess if you feel strongly on the issue, you can check out what others are saying and maybe even submit your own comment with your own perspective as a student pharmacist. Of course, rescheduling does not equal decriminalization. States can schedule however they want and however they see fit. It depends on if the federal government is going to enforce it. However, public opinion is on the side of cannabis. 91% of Americans surveyed say in a Pew Research poll that marijuana should be legal for medical use, and that number is going up daily as well as recreationally as well. So there's lots of potential, and I'm sure that by the time I'm lecturing this to next year's lab class, they're probably going to get an entirely new slide. And if cannabis is ever legal, I'm going to have to throw out about 1/3 of my presentation. So enjoy this while it lasts. So anyway, that is the lecture for today. Feel free to comment or contact me with any questions that you might have. You can contact me. I'll respond fastest via email, dominic.defilipi@wne.edu. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you may be.